perhaps I shouldn't say it, but my favourite chapter in the whole thing, it's not even a chapter, it's more than one chapter even, but the Battle of Brenna is the most extraordinary thing I've ever read for a battle, because it's a battle about slaughter and horror and all the things that go on. It's every level of it is looked at, but it actually expresses it all in terms of love. And I've never seen anyone do something quite as clever as that before. It's amazing. Love of your country, love of life, the doctors in the tent, everything. Oh, it's just, that shouldn't be, slaughter. Why should that be about love? But it is. That's the way he tells it. Amazing. Genius.
Goodness, now I have to check back in with you in 3 more years, Softie, when we get back. I'll take you on for Brenna. It'll be great. Guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. We are back. Thank you for your patience as I was pivoting the podcast to new and other things based on the SAG and WGA strikes. We are back with Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski, and I'm so excited to dig into the books with you. As we go through the books, we have a slightly new format for the show. If you haven't really listened in a while, I've been experimenting with a discussion-based format rather than a scene-by-scene format. So that's what we're going to do for Time of Contempt, as well as Netflix's The Witcher Season 3 when we circle back around to it. That being said, this episode we're welcoming Overbeck from New Zealand to the Hanza on Patreon. Thanks as always to our podcast patrons over on Patreon and our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Haven at the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Beggarburg Glamorai, The Original Roach, Connor's Cat, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softie. If you've enjoyed the last seasons of Breakfast in Beauclair, consider supporting the show on Patreon. Monetary support for the show goes toward hosting and website services, episode transcriptions for deaf and hard of hearing members of our community, original music for the podcast, original artwork, recording equipment, and more. Learn more about donating to the show at patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, John, aka Softie from the UK, calls in for our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 1. Join us as we discuss the life and times of a royal messenger, sly historical references, and the correct way to wear a squirrel's tail. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Time of Contempt, Chapter 1. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming back a member of our hanza to the show. Our guest today hails from the northeast of England, and you'll recognize them from their previous appearance on Breakfast in Beauclair, episode 71, 101 of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades from Netflix's Blood Origin. He's currently a squall developer for an educational charity, but his colorful history includes years as a construction worker, bar cellarman, and night warehouseman, and a degree in history specializing in England in the Middle Ages and early modern period. Please welcome John, aka Softie from the UK. Hey Softie, what's up?
Yeah, well, things are pretty exciting here.
Yeah.
Life carries on as always, so my little cats are settled in beautifully. So we've got little Toast and little No Face, who are bringing chaos to the house in all its forms.
Yeah, you and me both. I brought home a puppy in the last week. So much chaos and so much teeth and so many accidents, but all good things. But what have you been up to since you were last on the show back in, January, February?
Yeah, I mean, my working life continues as always. I work from home and have done for 8 years. So the pandemic wasn't a big change for me. It was just interesting that everyone else got to experience it. And I'm still out walking all the time because I'm lucky enough to live on Hadrian's Wall in the nice rough bit in the middle. So the exciting bit with all the ups and downs, and there's beautiful sort of walks I've started to find along the South Tyne Valley, and I've now started doing sort of funny walks where I try and link together a series of castles and stuff, just something to make it thematic and fun. Today I've had my third encounter with an owl, which flies around in the daytime out on the moors. And it's the same owl, I'm sure, but it circled me twice today.
Oh.
And I'm definitely going to try and film it next time because I now know pretty much where it lives. So I'm going to get some decent footage. I've got one blurry photo so far. He's my buddy, that one.
Yeah, I feel like he's probably keeping an eye out for you now, too. It's such a casual flex that you're like, yeah, I just went out on my morning walk and also I'm going to stop by a bunch of castles along the way. Not quite the same when you're in New York, huh?
No. Yeah, well, you've got all the fairy tale castles to visit, haven't you? I've got the funny ones here because it's the border country here. So it's where the border-reavers used to sort of fight across the Scottish-English border. So there's all these tough families that they were actually intermarried quite closely, but they did used to go into each other's towns and trash it regularly.
Yeah.
Women folk being sensible, they actually had this amazing deal that they had sorted out. It's like, we are not having the house burnt. The children are not going to be turned out into the cold and things. So when one of the, if the Scots had won the fight in the English town, it was just sort of this understood that the Scottish men would now go to the houses with the English wives and things would go on as normal, but with a new partner for the night. It's extraordinary, that this was like a deal that was one of the reasons it was stamped out.
Sure.
It was, seen as being, this thoroughly unchristian behavior going on. And not just that they were fighting and stealing from each other, but it was that side of things that really got under the church's collar.
Maybe the next European Hanza meetup is just going to be like Softie's history walk through Northumbria and everything. Yeah. Alternatively, we should record like a little audio walk along. Listen to your dulcet tones as you walk along Hadrian's Wall.
There's quite a lot of swearing, I have to say. I'm not sure that would be
wildly entertaining. Wildly
Yes.
entertaining. People are going to pay for the content.
I walk with a walking staff because I fall over all the time. It's most annoying.
Relaxing walk. ASMR. Well, it's so nice to sit down with you again as we're going through and opening up Time of Contempt. I think I'll be honest that out of all of Sapkowski's books in the Witcher series, every book in this series is so good that Time of Contempt just ends up at the bottom of the list for me. And so I feel like this series of podcast episodes is going to be so interesting as I'm like revisiting this book again and encountering, the highlights and lowlights of it, and really exploring this turning point of the series with yourself and other guests.
Yeah, there's a lot of great spade work done here that has set the story up, like more so than there was in Blood of Elves. Blood of Elves is about meet the characters.
Yes.
This is the family. And then this one is really, the story starts to grow really strongly from here. And there's an enormous amount of foreshadowing in this book.
Yeah, we're recording a bit out of order. So I have heard some of the frustrations of future guests with, God, the foreshadowing. We can't talk about anything yet. And there's so much foreshadowing. But truly, it's interesting when you look at, the 5 books of the saga as a full narrative and in acts. Time of Contempt is the inciting event. And it's just like, cool, we could talk about everything up to here, but there's so much that happens after and so much that is yet to be seen when we visit Time of Contempt. It's exciting. Will be a good ride. And so on that note, today we're beginning our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt with Chapter 1, in which we follow Aplegatt, a royal messenger, on his travels across the northern kingdoms as Geralt of Rivia learns more and more about the looming threats to his ward, Cirilla of Cintra. Here's a quick synopsis of the chapter from future Alyssa. In Chapter 1, Aplegatt, a royal messenger, dutifully delivers important messages between kingdoms. Through his travels, it's clear the political landscape on the continent has become more unstable since Blood of Elves. Kings openly distrust mages, war hangs in the air, the Lion Cup of Cintra is presumed dead, and the northern realms are preparing to provoke Nilfgaard under a false flag campaign. Along the way, Aplegatt encounters Yennefer and Ciri, who have left the Temple of Melilli in Alander, and Geralt, who has returned to the path, hunting monsters for coin. In a bizarre encounter, Ciri prophesizes the messenger's death. Meanwhile, Geralt pays a visit to Codringer, a lawyer in Dorian whose true specialty is information and, quote, problem-solving. In exchange for payment, Codringer presents findings about Rince, the mysterious sorcerer who's been hunting for Ciri. Rince was kicked out of Banard before being recruited into the Kidwani Secret Service. He served time in Cintra for debts under Calanthe's rule, but was released when an anonymous benefactor paid off his debts with interest. Codringer hypothesizes that Rince must be in the service of another sorcerer, and that the Nilfgaardian Secret Service may be attempting to turn this northern mage by recruiting Rince as well. However, the threats to Ciri don't end there. Codringer informs Geralt that Foltest of Temeria's Secret Service tried contacting him to find Ciri and Geralt, but he fed them false information that Ciri died 3 years ago in a refugee camp after the First Nilfgaardian War. Codringer introduces his business partner, Fen, to Geralt, and they discuss Ciri's importance on the continent and Calanthe's legacy and influence on Ciri's future. This is also a short story recap for readers. Codringer and Fen want to spread the rumor that Ciri may not be used to seize Cintra, thus making her useless to both the Northern Kingdoms and Nilfgaard. Geralt challenges Codringer to research Child of the Elder Blood, but can't afford the high price for the information. He advises Geralt to cut ties with Ciri and hide away in GoodMorhen, but the Witcher refuses to abandon his ward. Instead, Codringer proposes leaving another Cintran war orphan to pose as Cirilla for the kingdoms and empires to hunt. Geralt also refuses. Geralt learns from Codringer that 3 hired sellswords are after Yennefer and Ciri, trailing them on their way to the Conclave of Mages in Thanedd. Geralt bets Codringer for the translations of the Elven manuscripts and the information on the Child of the Elder Blood on credit. While dining in a tavern, Aplegatt finally meets Geralt as the Witcher stakes out the trio hunting Yennefer and Ciri. The messenger overhears the men questioning the innkeeper before they're called out to the yard by Geralt and to their deaths. Aplegatt gives Dijkstra of Redania a message from Demavend of Aedirn that the disguised troops are ready and the lion cub is dead. Dijkstra replies back that Demavend must hold back the disguised troops for fear of a true provocation with Nilfgaard in Dol Angra. However, before he can deliver the critical message to Aedirn to stop the campaign, Aplegatt is killed on the road by a Scoia'tael commando, just as Ciri prophesized. So now that we've gotten a synopsis on this chapter, Softie, I'd love to hear some of your overall thoughts about the chapter as a whole.
Yeah, so I thought it was a good way to snap the reader out of the happy torpor from the end of Blood of Elves, where we had that beautiful chapter with Ciri and Yennefer bonding together in the Temple of Melitele. But here we're getting to see very different things. All the troops on the move. Everything we hear tells us that no one has got the interests of our main characters at heart. No one cares about them. No one's got any feelings for them other than how they work as political pieces on the board or how they stop people doing what they want to do. I like the way it's unconventionally told through the eyes of onlookers, and the fact that although there's lots of action in this chapter, as we've discussed in later chapters, it's more obvious. In this one, there's lots of action in this chapter, but it all takes place out of our sight, or we hear about it, and that's quite exciting in its own way. I think it's certainly an interesting way of writing the story.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find so fascinating about Sapkowski's work is when he feels like writing about something, he does. And if he doesn't feel like it, he's like, I'm just not going to put that in. And you guys can figure it out later. But this chapter really exemplifies one of the things that I find most fascinating about his work, his extended use of tertiary and, side characters. And we see more than one of them here. We spend a lot of time with Aplegatt in a way that, we're not going to see from other characters. For whatever reason, I adore Aplegatt. When we've played Among Us, whenever I name characters and I'm playing with the Hanza, I always go as Aplegatt. I don't know why. He's great. I think he's awesome. And like I said, such a unique and interesting perspective that we wouldn't get otherwise. And we'll talk a little bit more about the role that he plays in the work. I think when you open it up and you're just you're hearing about these characters that you've spent 3 books with, and you're just kind of hearing about them in passing, it makes you want to know more about what they've been up to, but you're just getting little snippets. It's such a tease. And I think that's what I really love about this chapter. Any particular standout highlight or lowlight moments for you, Softie?
Yeah, I like the way the tension is built from Ciri's premonition, which is quite early on in the chapter. It changes slightly the wording, but time is running out, time is getting short. Classic Andrzej Sapkowski, 3 times it's repeated. He always does that, and it's the rule of 3s works here as it does in anything. It's interesting if you listen to the audio, but you don't pick up on it quite so much as you do on the page, because with Peter Kenny reading it, and he's using pretty much the same voice he gives Aplegatt anyway, but it's not actually, he doesn't think it, it's the authorial voice, it sits outside of it, so that running timer is coming from Andrzej himself rather than from the characters. As it should, they shouldn't know that time is running out. But, in the same time, he is a messenger. He is racing against the clock himself in his own way. The low light I had, if I have one at all, was entirely self-inflicted. And this was it's quite embarrassing, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I took a nice big sort of close-up from the maps that people have done. Someone's done a beautiful map, like a real proper, Ordnance Survey style map,
Mhm.
like a gorgeous one with all the relief and things on it. And I thought, right, let's read this. And it's like, oh, okay, so we know from Vengerberg to Vicima, that's 5 days travel. But he's starting off at Haga, so that should only be 3 days. Oh, yeah, right, here he is. So he's crossed the border. We know that it would be like another 2 days to get to Vicima from here, but he's going to go south to Maribor. Well, that's 2 days. And I was doing it all on the map and putting the little lines in between to show
Yeah.
each character so I could see it's like, does it work? Because he's terrible for non-linear storytelling. He sometimes throws you've got things that are going on where he'll go back to an earlier point and things without making it clear that he's done that. Or
Right.
whole ass characters who just jump through time and mess up the timeline entirely, which, you can't really do much about that. But this was great, because I had all my different color pens on there. I was having a great time with it. And this is brilliant. It all works perfectly. And it's like, of course, they drew the map from the book because he didn't provide them. Of course it bloody works. It's the only place where he actually puts in clear distances between places. So mysteriously, everything's exactly where it should be. But that's kind of the only bit. And he really sticks to that bit of the map as well, because, later where he gives us a bit more information as well, it's when Geralt comes out of Brokilon with the same characters and meets Regis and people, that takes place just a little bit southeast of this area. And then the Battle of Brenner is just a little bit north from there. And it's like everything, these huge things all take place in this very small area. Well, it's not that small, it's half of Temeria, but, you get the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, again, one of those things that, like, if Sapkowski didn't have to bother with it, they just didn't do it. And, like, I feel like a map is such a funny example of that. You have authors like George R.R. Martin and like Tolkien that really put a lot of effort into building out their worlds and the history of it separate from their main storylines, where if Sapkowski is just like, eh.
Yeah.
I think for the chapter highlights and lowlights, I mean, Aplegatt as a whole, highlight for me, series highlight for me. No particular reason, I just enjoy him. That scene where Geralt is with Codringer throws the throwing star at him, and just that line of like, damn it, you didn't even flinch. And Geralt turns around and goes, why? I could hear you aiming to miss. And it's like, oh, that's so good. It's so good. And then, of course, Aplegatt's death is a highlight for me for a number of different reasons, which I think we're going to talk about, not just in this chapter, but in future chapters as well, because of its impact, his place in the narrative. That last paragraph of the chapter is just done really beautifully. Goodness, it just happens like you don't realize it's coming despite Ciri's warning and Ciri's prophecy. And then you get to the end of the chapter and we see Teruviel, who we met in the Edge of the World. She was one of Filavandrel's elves. I just love the ending of that. Before we get into the chapter itself, I'd love to chat about any cultural or historical references. Readers of Sapkowski will know that his books are littered with mythological references, political or cultural history that I sometimes, as like an American reader, will often miss. Was there anything in particular that you happened to catch in this chapter?
He loves to do his little geopolitical touch points in the text. I mean, he just does. There's no getting away from it. And, one of the ones that sort of just pops up in this one is when Fen, I think it is looking through the family trees and stuff for the Mechdian royal family when Geralt was claiming that Duny was, claimed to be a prince from Mech. Here's the children of the family, and you've got Orm, Norm, Gorm, and what have you, and then Gonzalez just pops in at the end. And well, that's funny.
And Argentina.
Yeah, and when you're going through that, and you're thinking, well, that's funny because two of the girls' names, the last two that he gives, is actually Malvina and Argentina, which I know is almost certainly just like a little, as far as he's concerned, just like a little fun reference to, the small disagreement between Argentina and United Kingdom over the Falkland Islands, which Argentina refers to as Las Malvinas. So to have Argentina and Malvina at the same, it's too much of a coincidence, I think, for it to be anything other than a little joke. In both cases, you suddenly get sort of more Hispanic names appearing at the end of quite northern names. And at first I was thinking, well, why is this? Was it just a joke? And then you think, well, actually, the usurper came in and kicked out sort of Duny's family and stuff. So maybe that was how you suck up. You start naming your children after this, this rival's family and stuff. And that's how he got put on the throne in the first place.
Ah, interesting.
But the main cultural ones I get that I found most entertaining was the showdown in Harbour with the hired killers that Geralt puts himself in the way of. I mean, they're following Yennefer principally. Ciri still, people aren't actually aware she's still on the board as a piece. That's been quite well handled by Codringer already to put people off the scent with that. Realizing that they're trying to draw him out by threatening Yennefer, he does the opposite, and he says, "All right, fine, I'm going to get in your way, and I'm going to take you down." It's classic spaghetti western. I mean, it's hilarious. You've got this basically an inn, all right, so it could be a saloon. It's got wooden boards, and these three desperados come in, literally with their spurs jangling as they walk.
Right.
Just like, well, oh, okay, we haven't even heard about spurs very much in these stories before, but got to have spurs if you're going to go into an inn and start looking for someone. Then he calls them out from the street, and it's like, oh, we're going to have the big showdown in the street, and he just throws us off completely by, of course, having all the action taking place outside, and you're just hearing
right.
it. But there it is. It's a Wild West shootout right there, but just done with swords.
And what a fascinating perspective for that too, because we're always with Geralt when he does, like little showdowns or big showdowns, his monster fights, that sort of thing. So to get multiple scenes where, Aplegatt is on the road and he hears about the monster fight that Geralt had, and then he's in the inn as Geralt is fighting outside, we never really think about or consider the day-to-day person within this fantastical realm, which is why it's so interesting that like Aplegatt focuses on the woman nursing the baby in the corner and like the reactions of the innkeeper
and the cat
and the reality really is that like we forget how spectacular and out of the ordinary Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri are until we're seeing them contrasted with ordinary people in their world. But what a good scene with the professor and the others.
Yeah, to have them set up so well as well that, they're even better with a sword than the Michelet brothers. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. It's all going down.
Even that last part of the fight where you just hear drawn out screams and then all of a sudden you hear someone running to the door. I love how photographic it feels. Imagine someone running to the door and then the staggering footsteps in the pool of blood, and it's just... What a great end to a fight scene.
Sneaky Sapkowski as well. The fact that you hear the heavy feet running with you as the reader, knowing Geralt, we're in no doubt, he's fine because Geralt will run silently. This isn't the kind of thing he does. Heavy feet running? Nah, Geralt's fine. This is someone else getting sliced by him.
Goodness.
I forgot. And for Spaghetti Western as well, let's not forget, Aplegatt doesn't even know who Geralt is, so he is literally the man with no name. He is like Clint Eastwood's character coming in off the high plains. It's amazing.
Like, I mean, even the line of just like, he obviously wasn't going to make it. There was no way he was going to make it. And it's just, it's so good. But yeah, definitely, what a highlight. Even seeing our character, one of our favorite characters at a distance. And yeah, so as we've kind of discussed our highlights, lowlights, cultural references, and overall thoughts, I'd love to dig down into the discussion questions for this chapter. How would you say this chapter transitions the reader from Blood of Elves and then sets the tone for Time of Contempt?
It obviously it picks up the pace after the sojourn in the Temple of Melitele, but it's reconnecting us with Chapter 6. We saw the monarchs, the crowned heads all sitting around and having their secret meeting in Haga Castle. Very quickly, Ciri went from being someone we definitely want to get hold of because we would love to marry her and look after her to being, no, what if someone else does it? We're going to butcher her. Like, wow, thanks, guys. It's amazing because we're now seeing the results of that meeting. Not for anyone knows that the meeting's taken place necessarily, but Aplegatt understands what he's seeing. And I think that's fascinating. He knows what's going on. He's hearing the messages that are going back and forth, but he's also, he knows what he's seeing. Yeah. He thinks as an economist. And he looks at all of these things and the stuff that I love. He's describing all these, big wagons, these wains going into these fortresses, all laden down with supplies. And you think, wow, what's that doing to prices for the local people? All this food being stored ready for armies and troops to march through. Everything's been requisitioned, and you just, you try and think of all these wagons that he then describes leaving empty. And some of the characters we've had, like, Dainty Beaverfeld would be stood by the side of the road, clenching and unclenching his little hands, watching these empty wagons. Like, all these lost business opportunities, the sheer wastefulness of war, even before anyone starts fighting. It's there on the page, and, everywhere he goes, soldiers on the move, recruits moving to recruiting centres, cavalry troops. It's just fascinating for someone to just present it from that side, because everyone does the thing, but, here's a cavalry going past, the jingle of bits and, mail shirts, jingling away as the riders go past. They love doing that bit, but how do you keep them on the road? How do you supply them? How do you feed them? How does all that side of it go? That doesn't usually get covered at all. And he brings that right to us. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he does that, does a really great job of showing and then tells. So has all of the indications of war that you were describing. And then, in short, war hung in the air. I think it's a very nice introduction to the new atmosphere on the continent. Blood of Elves was such a reprieve, and it was so relaxing in it, early years with Ciri and Kaer Morhen as she gets to know Yennefer. Geralt has issues. I mean, it wouldn't be a book if he didn't, but it's been leisurely. Blood of Elves was like a leisurely introduction into the saga. And then I think we're just hit instantly with the fact that, there's realities of war. And even though we're not yet with Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer as first-person characters, it's such a sharp contrast to the pace that we had seen in Blood of Elves that I think that's what really transitions the reader into the new side of the narrative and into that new atmosphere in Time of Contempt. It's a lot more serious, a lot more somber, and with all the hullabaloo around, everything that Aplegatt's experiencing, every chapter in this book is high intensity and high impact. And I do think that this chapter does a really good job of resetting the tone for readers. At the same time, we spend a lot of time with Codringer as he's reminding Geralt of all of these things that Geralt already knows and has experienced, but that readers might have forgotten from the short stories.
Yeah.
So again, another method of reintroducing characters, ideas, plot points that people may have forgotten if it's been a while since they read the short stories, or if they skip the short stories, they have a little bit of context for what has been going on. So again, another way that we're transitioning the reader through helpful reminders.
But that works really well because nothing comes out of the blue with him. I mean, he does lots of foreshadowing, as we know. Even in Blood of Elves, in the temple gardens, when everything's so lovely, Ciri remarks on all the crows and the birds that follow the armies that they're gathering, what's going on. And that, we already knew war was in the air, and we'd obviously had the previous chapter to tell us it was definitely being cooked up. But, the first signs were there, and then these are the further signs, like serious, unequivocal signs that which will be built on again in the next chapter from the banking side. It's amazing. It's all beautifully tied together. You get the sense that here's a writer who actually plans his stories. It's I think in some ways the only way to really understand The Witcher is to read it in reverse order. Once you've read it a couple of times, it's fascinating, to how much more you pick up on if the end of the story is fresher in your mind as you get to the earlier stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
You sometimes forget where it's going.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how much he had thought about beforehand and how much he knew where the story was going, if he had a plan at all. And on the subject of, this new perspective and big transitions, what do you believe Aplegatt's role and perspective uniquely tells us about the political climate on the continent in a way that our characters couldn't?
In this case, he's literally got the ear of and the voice of the kings. Which is truly fascinating. That he's got it down to that level. But he is a very keen observer. And he tells us at the beginning that the ultimate thing you need as a royal messenger is it's a head of gold and an arse of iron, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and he has got a head of gold. He does understand things. He does look around. He knows people well. When he goes into an inn, for instance, or into it somewhere, he tells them straight away that he doesn't need to requisition a mount because he doesn't want them spitting in his food again. This isn't a fool. This guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So he knows that he will be an unpopular figure in some ways. But it's interesting in that first inn that he stays in. But he's having a good look around the common room. He's listening to all the things that people are saying, and he's not judging what people are saying and things. He's just soaking it all up, and it's important. And because he's listening, we're allowed to listen with him. So as far as the story's concerned, these are huge lore drops that are going on here. But instead of it being, here's a foreword that you've got to, wade your way through, or here's like a bit of shoehorned in when, Mr. Exposition comes in, or Geralt thinks while he's looking, that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Whereas this guy, he's allowed to do this. This is his job, is to look around and keep an eye out. So when he's hearing things about, and we get a bunch of names just so that people don't just pop out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we hear about Sabrina Levisic and we hear about Vilgefortz of Roggeveen, and their various relationships, that these sorcerers aren't playing nicely with the monarchs anymore. That's key to know. But there's subtlety in there as well, as to what he's overhearing. He hears some stuff that's complete garbage, and he's not filtering it out as such. He's not telling us that it's garbage, but he's listening to everything because that's the way he is. But we get that real insight into the way the kings are getting on with each other because of these personal messages that get passed on. But he sets a series of rules for how the royal messengers are supposed to behave, and then has to break them so that the story works, which I find hilarious. I don't know whether he just didn't go back and re-edit it, or just that he thought, sod it, can't be asked. Sure, no one will pick up on it, but you do.
What were some of those things that stood out to you?
I mean, one of them is just a great bit of storytelling, which is that a royal messenger never lets anyone touch his horse. Now, that's not true. He can requisition a horse at any farm or things, so he's used to actually just pick up a horse he's never met before, let alone it. This is only my horse that I use, and no one else touches it. It's
right.
That's you could understand that someone could do something to a horse so that it's going to go lame along the road, and then someone could waylay him. But as we know, like, the serious messages are in his head anyway. So the stuff that you wouldn't trust a treacherous paper, I think, as he puts it. Which is great.
Which obviously can't go wrong by the end of the chapter.
It's the real device there that Aplegatt will see to his horse personally, is that gets him up early enough in the morning that he sees Yennefer and Ciri sneaking out. And the great thing there is, because he's an observant guy, he's been in the common room the night before and he hasn't seen them. And then he doesn't see them either in the common sleeping area when he goes there. So we now know Yennefer has obviously got a private room booked in, hasn't made themselves known to anyone. She's had food sent to the rooms. No one knows she's traveling incognito, in secret. And again, that ridiculous exercise I did with the maps paid off here, because this is like a day's journey out from the Temple of Melitele. So if you think about the way big monasteries and places like that usually operate, is that they're quite often, because they were a safe place that wasn't going to be destroyed in times of war, that's a place where people used to make wine and brew beer. And it would be quite likely that the Temple of Melitele supplies the booze that gets sold in that inn that they stay in. So of course they would have arrangements. It would be very easy for her to arrange to be able to stay in private rooms there. It's just a lovely little bit of background, which isn't going to at all, but it's just all the pieces are there if you want to put them together later. It's lovely. But I think the key one though is he says that the royal messengers, they have things that they've got in paper that you don't mind if someone steals them. It's not important. But the key thing is that the monarch will tell you personally, which you have to remember, even if it's got words that you don't understand or names that are hard to pronounce. You have to commit it to memory. You have to repeat it only to the person it's for. It's completely secret, and that's it. But when we first meet him, he's picked up the royal messages at Hargo on his way back from Redania. So he's caught up with the royal messages, and now he's carrying a personal message from Demoven to Foltest, but he hasn't met Demoven to get that message. So he's actually had someone else has passed the private message on. And the same thing happens later, after we have the run-in with Geralt and the Basilisk, which he doesn't see, obviously, but that's what's happened. He heads off towards Carreras, where he meets Harmon, another messenger who he knows, and they exchange messages. So we've been told this doesn't, that's not meant to happen, and yet it's happened twice, at least in the story. So, but he's not gone back and changed that part of the story. When he first introduces us, he says that you have to, it's utterly private, and you're supposed to forget it again later. But he does tell us, I do actually remember, so he does put the pieces together. But this is done for a story reason, and story reason alone, which is that this allows Aplegatt to take Demoven's original message down to Foltest, which is like, okay, we're all ready. The boats are in place.
Yeah.
2 nights after the full moon in July. Let's go.
Yeah.
So we're going to have this attack. This is great. Everything's going to work out. So that's the message that Foltest has received. And then, of course, he's heard about, the big meeting that's going to take place at Thaneth. So he then says, oh, well, not my fault, obviously, but I think we need to hold off because the windbags have called a meeting and, well, they might change things. So maybe we should just hold off on the attack. And he sends that message back with Aplegatt. But then he exchanges messages with Harmon. So we don't have a tedious step where he goes back to Demavend with the message from Foltest to say, "Oh, we should call off the attack." Instead, we hear before Demavend knows that Foltest is reneging on the plan. He's going to be sending another message through at this thing to Vizimir saying, "I don't trust bloody Foltest. He's likely to try and wiggle out of things. Don't pay any attention to the windbags. Let's just keep going. The mission is still on. July, 2 days after the full moon. Let's go." So it's amazing, that that's all allowed to happen that way. And it would be far less interesting, if he had to literally go all the way back to Demavend and get the message. That's which it would add like another 9 days onto the journey times, which would mean that the time isn't running out. Because really, all of this has to happen so that Aplegatt can get that last message. And this is the bit I love, is that when, which is why it should have been changed, really. He should have gone back to it and changed it as a standing rule, is that when he goes in, he doesn't get to see Vizimir. He instead meets Dijkstra. And Dijkstra says, "Right, listen up. This is a message I'm going to give you." And the lovely thing is he starts, saying this is from Vizimir to Demavend. It's like, no, it isn't. It's bloody Dijkstra. You're literally speaking with the voice of the king.
But he's allowed. He's allowed to be the voice of the king.
It just shows how powerful he is. But the great thing is he says, "This goes to Demavend. No one else." It goes straight into his ear and no one else. And I like that because I think that Dijkstra has been making use of this fact that the royal messengers swap messages for one another. That's how he's been intercepting messages all this time. He just has a couple of them on the payroll, and all he has to do. I wonder what Foltest is saying to Demavend that we don't know about. And all he's got to do is send the messenger down and intercept him and say, "Oh, we've got to exchange messages." And there you go. So it's, he knows that the Royal Messenger Service is compromised, which is why he's absolutely clear with Aplegatt. This goes straight to Demavend and no one else. And it also means there's no way for that message to go anywhere. So once Aplegatt rides off through the woods and meets his untimely end, it's like that can't get through. So that, the story that the attack is off, which is what he obviously asks for. He says, it's a trap, real Admiral Akbar stuff going on there. It doesn't do any good.
And that's the heartbreaking thing, is that we as readers, with the privilege of dramatic irony through Aplegatt, know that message to stop the attack never makes it. And I think, you've nailed perfectly, what Aplegatt's purpose is in this story is that there's so much in the political machine on the continent that Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri aren't privy to. One, it humanizes that experience for the reader, and we kind of understand how this political machine works on a day-to-day basis and how the kings are interfacing with each other and what their plans are. But we also hear about, everything that happens on that human level, how it affects everybody in the inns and in the crossroads, and how it's affecting the Scoia'tael. With Geralt being as prominent as he is, collecting coin and all that stuff, he's running errands. Yennefer and Ciri are traveling incognito. It does such a beautiful job of bringing the war and bringing the realities of it to the forefront and preparing us for our protagonists are going to clash with this political machine at some point. And I think it prepares us for understanding the context of that and why it's happening the way that it is, which makes the story even more suspenseful. I love the use of perspectives like Aplegatt's and the Scoia'tael's in Sapkowski's writing, just because I think as a reader it fleshes out the world a lot more and it humanizes all of those perspectives in a really interesting and compelling way. I love The Witcher, particularly because the world building is done with a series of characters and with unique perspectives rather than, I'm sure somebody's going to turn off the podcast, rather than strictly history and lore. But it does a nice way of making it entertaining, just purely entertaining. And I really enjoy that.
It tells us a bit about the author as well, doesn't it? That we know that he was a traveling businessman, so he quite often has those little jokes about it, about the way mattresses are abused by the traveling salesman for whatever reason. And but also with this, that it's the people watching thing that Aplegatt does must be from his own experience. He's always given us little vignettes of people that he meets, and it's quite often couples that he's interested in. So this whole thing, that in the inn in Anchor, you've already mentioned it. It's the lady with the dark rings under her eyes with the young baby, and she's turned to one side, and so she's shy about breastfeeding, and next to her is a big broad-shouldered fella slumbering on the bench, perhaps her husband, he doesn't know, but,
Yeah.
but that kind of stuff, that's great. And
Yeah.
you get the same thing later with, forest beekeepers and stuff, and their inexplicably attractive wife, probably a hamadryad. It's stuff like that I just love. And probably best of all for one of those is where he's going to. I think it's in Season of Storms, actually. So I know it's not a big favourite of yours, but there's a little sequence in there where he's trying to visit a character that he knows already, and he's experiencing certain hostility from this person's wife and children. And there's a pot of beans on the stove which could feature. And Geralt's very concerned about what's going to happen with that, because he knows perfectly well that they do not have good intentions for him at all. So I just like that. But just how these various characters get together is really interesting. And it is those little human touches. People don't just eat meals. We hear what they're actually eating. Birds flying overhead, know exactly what kind of bird it is, and the kinds of trees along the roadsides and stuff. He really likes all that stuff, puts it in, and it's not wasted. It really does build the world in a different way.
Very picturesque, from the action scenes to, as we'll see in a future chapter, his descriptions of like full populated towns and the architecture in them, and it's stunning. Even though I personally really enjoy the character interactions as one of my standout pieces of the Witcher series, which we'll talk about heavily in Baptism of Fire and beyond. One of the things I can't fault Time of Contempt for is its vision and its illusions in every sense of the word, and I just love that. A portion of this chapter really focuses on Geralt. When we're not with Aplegatt himself, we take a small sidestep to go see what Geralt's up to when he visits this quote-unquote lawyer Codringer. During this conversation, Codringer draws comparisons between Geralt and himself by saying that he's a quote-unquote modern witcher. As we explore this conversation, would you say you agree with Codringer with that comparison, or why or why not?
No, I agree with Geralt. There are notable differences without listing them. But,
yeah.
Knowing Geralt already, him and Codringer basically get together for the all to marry a miserable bastard tournament, to see who can be the most cynical and bitter.
Yeah.
He's just so cynical. We all have to be bastards in our jobs. And I'm just the same as you. I help people with troubles and monstrous issues and stuff. Geralt points out it's, the people that you're helping would actually be the ones that most people would classify as the monsters. We're not the same at all. He really is a, better call Codringer kind of a lawyer. He's a fixer rather than a moral man trying to uphold the law.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly can't claim that.
I think it's certainly a case of if you're looking for a common denominator, you're going to find one if you dig and you simplify enough. It's interesting. Like, I understand his perspective. I understand why he's trying to empathize or find parallels between himself and Geralt. But, I don't agree with your methods.
It's also it calls back to the opening of the chapter where you've got my favourites. I think Effenberg and Talbot and their Encyclopedia Maximum Mundi. I just love those guys. But they've got this ludicrously biased, weird view of what a Vegemin is.
Sure.
It's like,
sure.
wow, you couldn't get this more wrong. And I think the Witchers do this to themselves by they just put all these stupid stories out about themselves to protect them. This whole thing about, oh no, we don't take sides, got to pay us. So nothing else matters. Money talks, everything else, no, forget it. Give us money, we'll kill the monsters, but we won't get involved in your politics, your fighting, nothing like that. And of course, the story that's coming out from Effenberg and Talbot is that, there used to be these warrior monks. It's like, I don't think these are very monkish, these guys, I got to say. But not just that.
I don't know. They eat weird mushrooms in the mountains. So,
well, yeah. And there he's making a
again, baseline denominator.
Yeah, and that's the same thing we get with all the stories that come out about the bear sarks in the Vikings stuff. It's like, oh yeah, they used to eat magic mushrooms and go naked into battle and stuff. It's not a shred of evidence for any of this stuff. It's great, but these stories have grown and no one wants to let them go. No, these stories are great. They're
just
staying,
because you can't find the armor doesn't mean they were naked in battle.
Exactly.
One of those.
And so so the stories they put around about, we're just hard cases and stuff, that, maybe that's something Codringer's picked up on here as well that he's heard, but I don't think so. I think he's trying to rile Geralt. I think that's been their whole
Yeah.
experience all along, is that
Mhm.
he likes to wind him up.
It's an interesting conversation because we don't really meet characters quite like Codringer, at least not up until this point. People who are attempting to really challenge Geralt's ideology. Not saying that we won't meet more of those characters all throughout the rest of the series, because we continually do. But this is, I think, such a specific way of contrasting Geralt's ideals, where it's not just with this, but even with another problem as well. At some point, Codringer proposes that Geralt sacrifices a false Ciri to keep the real Ciri safe. And we've discussed the nature of the trolley problem on the podcast before, plenty of times. But by rejecting this idea from Codringer that they'll take this little girl, they'll say that she's Ciri, they'll send her off to Nilfgaard, and she'll die, inevitably. By rejecting that, what does this tell us about Geralt's current positions on both neutrality as well as fatherhood at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a straight callback to the lesser evil, isn't it?
Mhm.
Where he actually goes into, I think that's sometimes misunderstood, that story, because he's giving us the witch's made-up story about, we have to stay neutral and stuff. And that's the line he's playing all the way through that story, for instance. It's like, I can't take sides on here. There's no such thing as greater evil, lesser evil. It's just evil, and I don't want anything to do with it. But then after spending the night with Renfrey, for instance, he realizes, oh my God, they're going to start killing civilians in the market to try and, force the wizard out of the tower. So then he thinks, well, I have to stop that. That's an evil I can't ignore. So he's not really being neutral at all. He's actually is getting involved, but he's trying to stop things getting worse. He's asked Renfrey to just leave, just let it go. There's no point. This kind of revenge cycle is not going to ever end. No one's going to win. So he goes into town to stop them killing civilians, but they're not killing civilians. And then there is a butchery in Blaviken, but it was him, that the whole it's turned on its head, that yes, there was a massacre, but unfortunately it's Geralt that's done the massacre. And the same thing's coming up here, really. But I think it's a sign of Geralt's growth at this point, that I think he would have always been shocked by this as a plan, but it shows that, he's not just Ciri's guardian. It's not something that's been thrust upon him. He actually cares about her as a young woman now. And the idea that another young woman that he doesn't know should die. And as he says, well, what about me? Who am I supposed to despise in this story? It could only be himself. If he's the one who's, because Codringer obviously is completely amoral when it comes to things like this. So if I give you the money to do that to that girl, I'm responsible. He at least sees that.
The realities of that decision don't escape him at all. Like, it is still a reflection of his growing adoption of fatherhood. The Lesser Evil is a great piece of text to bring back into contrast with this, because it's continuing to show us how Geralt has changed over time and the profound effect that specific experience continues to have on his morals and his philosophy. He also believes that he can take care of the problem. I think whether or not that's true, it's his burden to carry, and he doesn't want to, I think, bring any more people into it that aren't involved. I don't know if that's reflective of his neutrality specifically, or just his position on fatherhood, or how he views his own personal place in the world. But there's so much shit for him to step in at the moment that I think he just wants to keep other people out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he wants to keep his relationship to Ciri clean. That this other girl dying wouldn't mean that he's got a wonderful future with Ciri as, being a father figure and stuff. He knows the innocence will be lost, that price is too high to pay. It's not just how he feels about himself. It's, what I feel about Ciri, if I let someone else die that's so much like her, it's too high a price to pay. It really is. And, but he's definitely trying to, he's not choosing which way the trolley's going. He's definitely jumping up there and trying to stop it. That's his new, I'll throw myself on the tracks rather than let it ride over anyone. So.
The way that it's phrased, though, he asks, and who am I free to despise? Am I to pay for what I love with contempt for myself? And what a beautiful way of wording that. He has to live with that guilt, which is, I think, again, a strong effect from the Lesser Evil and that experience in Blaviken. At the end of the chapter, when we circle back around to Aplegatt, he has received that last message. He's on his way, and he is ultimately, as we find out, killed by the Scoia'tael. Ciri's prophecy comes to pass. You have the silent white feathers and the hot sand. and he dies instantly with that message in his head to stop or halt the attacks that were expected to happen against Nilfgaard 2 days after the new moon. Before then, though, we have a new perspective with the Scoia'tael, the ones that are going to kill him. Just before Aplegatt is killed, Trivial asks her companions, is that killing civilians, as we discover, what fighting for freedom is about.
Trivial's attitude has changed as well, hasn't it?
Mm.
We met her before where she was actually, dead keen, beating up Dandelion and stuff,
Yeah.
and Geralt, and smashing lutes, and generally hating Doin completely. It's like, you have no right to our music, smash. It's like,
Right.
oh, okay, But to just see that, she's obviously been desperately keen enough to join the Scoia'tael. But here we have to, we find out in the chapter, or we've already found out in the chapter through various people just, talking about rumors and stuff, that the Scoia'tael have broken down from the big commandos they were riding around in. So these would have been big armed bands like the one we met at Sherrowed and things, that they've now broken down into much smaller groups, so because they're getting hunted so badly that it's safer for them to go around in little tiny parties, which are the ones we get to know about later in the stories, that, sort of 4 or 5 at a time going around, and that they would maybe ambush people. So it's kind of horrible that one of the unexpected consequences of the attacks on the Scoia'tael, and it's allowed them to break down into these ambush parties, and that's ultimately going to kill Aplegatt. That he actually hears about this as one of the rumors that's going around, and that seems quite a shame. But here, Ceruvial's kind of lost a bit of her get up and go already. Is this really what we're supposed to be doing? And if you try and think it through, the elves can't win a battle of attrition. This is their problem. There's so few of them. So what? Kill one human at a time, and each time you kill a human, they'll go out and hang 8 of you. It's like, this isn't going to end well. This is awful. And she's already feeling that, this early in the story, which seems a terrible shame. They've made almost no attempt to reclaim their homeland yet.
Yeah, she's an unapologetic character, which is one of the things that I, again, find really interesting about her, and the change of her character since we last saw her in The Edge of the World. It's, again, like a really interesting commentary on, I think, the realities and the efforts and the effects of war, and at what scale. We spend a lot of time with Aplegatt talking about the movement of armies, the construction of ships hidden in the forests. We're listening to the kings as they're plotting how is the Scoia'tael philosophy and how is the philosophy of war actually played out on a small scale.
She gets to show us how they've been played. I mean, this is like one of the first ways we're seeing it, really. It gets much, much darker as the stories go on, obviously, and her outlook changes for the darker, as it should.
Yeah.
When we meet her up in the mountains and wanting to drive the Doina back into the sea, that's where she wants to go. It's, we're going to come down other hills, we're going to take back our lands and drive them all out. And that's why she's joined up, And so those original big attacks with the Scoia'tael and stuff must have suited her, her idealism perfectly. But then the endless, dreadful fighting that they're doing, they're being ganged up on from all sides. The kings, we saw them in, chapter 6 of Blood of Elves, launching another great pogrom. Attacking the settled non-humans in the cities, as well as attacking them out in the forests. And that this has then led to them splintering into these smaller groups. And, she's that jaded now that she's just looking and saying, well, why would we attack this person? And, well, they're going to chase us again if we kill them. So, who's going to find them out here? So, that's the attitude. That he still does his thing where it's the little touches that I'm so interested in that he just this bit just made me laugh first time I heard it, and it still makes me giggle now. It's the archer that actually draws a bead on Aplegatt. Before he does so, he swings the squirrel's tail to the back of his head, right? Now,
so
first, when I heard about
it's not in his face,
When I first heard about the squirrel's tails hanging from their caps and stuff, I was thinking of Davy Crockett at the Alamo with his
it'd be in the back anyway.
So I'm just, apologies for Tommy, but raccoon skin hat that they used to wear with the tail at the back. But here we've got this idea that the elves are definitely goths. I mean, they're just flapping in front of their eyes all the time.
Just terrible fringe.
I have to just chuck this back so I can shoot this man. It's like, wow.
It's not that long either. Like, it can't be longer than his face. So where is it, realistically, where is it going?
Just, why would you have that thing dangling in your face? Just horrendous, just for a sartorial choice.
Maybe it's like a side fringe. Maybe it's just like a one over the eye side fringe.
Straight away, though, it just breaks down into an argument about how far away is he? It's all right with my 60-pounder and stuff. You think, yep, I can see why Milva gets on with these guys.
Yeah.
Oh, I can take a shot that far. My 60-pound bow. It's so she'd be right at home with this crowd.
I think it's one of those things that it humanizes the Scoia'tael, and also we've spent the entire chapter with Aplegatt, and at least for me, I've come to love him as a character. Yeah. I think he's great. Meaningless. This man is meaningless to the Scoia'tael, and they knock him off without a second thought. And, I'm sure scurry back into the forest. His death, even though it has profound effects on literally the entire continent, is just so fast and so meaningless in the context of this specific scene. It's one of those things that, like, they're just arguing about how to kill him. And it's just like, oh.
Like it's a professional problem that has to be solved. What's the best kind of arrow to use? But it's also the fact that this killing one person, what difference would it make? Actually, it did make a big difference. So she was kind of wrong about that.
Huge difference, massive difference. And
not that I think he's actually trying to encourage terrorist atrocities.
Sure.
It's just that so happens that this one worked.
We'll just give Sapkowski the benefit of the doubt, yeah.
But there's a nice remark earlier as well in the story where they're saying, the Scoia'tael who are now attacking humans across the continent, stirred on by humans' racism. And he's thinking, yep, yeah, this is interesting, It's a lovely way of putting it, that well, they started it. So here we go.
It's certainly circular. And I think, again, like the way that fantasy serves as a vehicle for analyzing real world politics and cultural problems is something that I find incredibly compelling because it gives you the opportunity to talk about taboo topics with kind of this little glaze of just like, no, but it's different species and like they're different colors and they're just dryads. That is well summed up in Reveal's question. Like, is that what fighting for freedom is about? And I think it's something that, as I said, gives me pause. I think about current events and what Sapkowski might have experienced prior to writing this and how his life experiences being in Poland may be reflected by questions like this in the text.
It's, it was sad enough just with the hot sand coming back in. It was, right from when Ciri first, foresees his death. Certainly it's a very important part in the story here doing that. Mm-hmm. We've seen her having dreams, weird disconnected dreams and things going on. But this is probably the first time we've seen her having a clear image of something like that. And, it coming true. And the great thing is that Yennefer misses it because it's in the stable. So she doesn't see her having this prophetic vision, because he notices that her eyes go, huge and glazed and out of focus and things when she's doing it. But it prepares us, the reader, because he does this all the time. He introduces a thing now so that it won't, seem like, well, where did that come from later in the stories? So he does this a lot here. So as I said already, I mean, he mentions a group of characters who are going to reappear, but he does other things as well. that throwing star, the Orion. That's a really smart move that, Codringer is telling us for no reason that we need to know in this book that, the Nilfgaardian Secret Service, this is a standard issue to them now. So later on in the book where someone throws one of these things, it's not like, you don't lose your place in the chapter thinking, throwing stars? I thought they were from Japan. And, you're wondering where it's going. It's like, oh, no, I know about
as you do,
already. Yeah, these people are Nilfgaardian Secret Service. Of course, they're going to have those. We know this already.
Yeah.
You just accept it, without it breaking the story for you. He's got, as well as that, he's got his various plates that he keeps spinning, and as he said, going back to the short stories, and doing one of his 3 times repetitions that the great thing is where Codringer is setting it up, the plan, we're going to make it that no one would accept Ciri as a legitimate heir to the throne of Cintra and things, because we're going to play on, this the monstrous Urkian, this father of hers, he was an odd one, he's this weird creature. So no good can come from that union. And then, of course, Geralt starts piping up saying, no, Dooney, that was his name, and then repeats Dooney again. And then Fenn says, no, there's no Dooney in this list. So that name Dooney is suddenly 3 times it's repeated just to make sure. It's like, if the name Dooney were ever to come up again in the story, you're going to think, oh, yeah, that guy. I've heard that name before. So that's good, as well as all the other characters that we know are going to reappear along the way. But with Ciri, her vision, the key thing is we get to see it play out exactly as she said it would, that she's seen all of these things. So, later on when people just accept straight away that she has true visions and stuff, because obviously sorcerers, when they would be presented with her in that state, would recognize it for what it is. But the good thing is we know it now, because otherwise that it would be an odd thing, she just steps up to this from what we've seen before. We'd had warnings on this, that in that chapter with Yennefer and Ciri, that one of the ways the source tests someone is to show them visions of the death of people they love, to get them to reach for the source to see if they can stop it or help it. That's how the source tries to draw someone into it. That's how you get your magic. So it's interesting that Ciri is still in that embryonic stage at the moment. She hasn't had her full training in magic yet, but how interesting that even a character she's just met on the road, that the source is reaching to her and showing him visions of this man's death. And I think that's significant. I don't think that's an accident at all, which is why I say I doff my cap to him as a storyteller. He does plan these things.
And as you said, huge amount of foreshadowing in this chapter alone and in that experience with Aplegatt for Ciri. This is her coming of age story. That is what the saga is. And we are going to spend so much time with her, exploring themes through her story and her experiences. What a fantastic and interesting chapter to start on for that, and a small taste of what we'll see from her powers here with Aplegatt. And as we kind of close down our conversation, what do you think you take away about our primary protagonists and antagonists in this chapter? People like Geralt, Yen, Ciri, Rince, and the forces of the Northern Kingdoms.
The key thing with Geralt is, yes, we know he's running around doing his job in the background because of the basilisk that he's killed.
Yeah.
So he's doing standard Witcher type stuff as well. But it's the way that, having moved across to Dorian and spoken to Codringer and Fenn, where he reluctantly because Codringer thinks it's a bad idea, but he says, yeah, well, there's little Yaxa and the others are chasing Yennefer, that she's being smart, she's not using magic, and she's moving quietly, and no one really knows quite where she is, but they know she's on the way, they know where she's going, which makes it easy to waylay her, really. But the fact that he goes after them, he's putting himself at risk. He's also earned 250 Novigrad crowns, and he's just given them all away to get information so that he can protect Ciri in some way. And it's, that's astonishing in its own way. I mean, I know he's a mutant and he can live for an extraordinary length of time and stuff, and maybe money's not that big a deal, but it's important he's taking it seriously, that this really matters to him, that he's doing this. And then he goes out and he's makes a point, having killed the desperados, of telling people that there may be a price on these people's heads, and if anyone comes sniffing around after them, you tell them, the wolf's on you, and if you turn around one day, he'll be there and he'll bite you. So just
so
back
good.
off. But that's not he's not about protecting himself. It's not. He knows they're not after him. They're after people he loves. And that's important. But we also get a lovely little insight with Geralt is when he's first going to go and see Codringer and Fenn. He spent the night, so we don't actually know where he's waking up, but he wakes up from a dream, and he says he does have dreams, he just never remembers them. But today he's remembered this one, and he's had a nightmare, because he always has nightmares, and this one he actually remembers, because he finds himself having Ciri's dream about the knight in black armor with the wings on the helmet chasing him, and he's not seeing an actual true vision of what happened in Cintra, because the knight picks Ciri up by the hair and pulls her onto the horse and drags her along. It's like, well, that's not quite how that went down. So that's quite interesting. It's not a true vision. It's perhaps Ciri's nightmare, that while she's projecting all of this stuff, for instance, he's now picking it up. And what's really interesting is it links Geralt and Cahir and Ciri in a dream, for the first time. So again, it's that foreshadowing thing, that if this were to happen later, if dreams and tries these three together again, we've already seen it, that it can happen. Geralt's never seen Cahir before. He has no idea who this guy is. And, he will meet him, obviously, in the story. but it's important, and again, it's significant as how it comes to him. The dream.
There's so much like lore and info and expository dumping
Yeah.
that happens in this chapter. As you said,
But
Geralt.
subtly.
It's a little heavy-handed, particularly around the middle. Codringer is just like, do you remember all of this stuff that happened in the last 3 books? And we're just like, oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, Geralt is again off witchering, but we do understand that he is actively trying to solve this while Ciri and Yennefer are busy. Ciri's being babysat, so he can go off and, try to solve this in his own little Geralt way, the best that he can. And we'll see how Yennefer tries to, solve these things on her side in the next few chapters as well.
And with Yennefer, it's very much, the mystery of the dog that barked in the nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
And she barely features in this chapter. And why? Because she's moving quickly and quietly and secretly across. And importantly, when Aplegatt's hearing all the rumors and things, I mean, they're talking about sorcerers in Vengerberg and things. No mention of Yennefer, just that she's dropped out. She's just disappeared, and when you're putting the map
again,
together
foreshadowing.
But what a stark contrast. At this point, no one's talking about Yennefer. It just doesn't come up in anyone's stories about, all the rumors about what's going around, all these high-handed sorcerers. No one even mentions her, and like later on, it's like she's all anyone's talking about, what happened to her, what part did she play in things? And it's amazing. She never has this kind of anonymity again.
Yeah.
But there was the another lovely little thing which I can't not mention just because it's not written in there, but I think it's there. I think it's canon, so I'm sticking with this.
Okay.
It's, when Codringer is explaining how he's put the Temerian Secret Service off by spreading this disinformation that I've got definite truth that Cirilla of Cintra she died horribly in this refugee camp and things that's got witnesses to it and the whole thing. They were saying, well, they were shadowing Geralt, but they weren't going to attack him. Because they said, well, why didn't they just, capture him and just torture him and find out what he knew as well as things that he didn't know, get him to say anything again to stop them hurting him. And they said, no, because there's a thing with witches. So we're back to the front piece again with the misinformation that's put out about witches. The thing is with the Witcher is they've got this big vein in their brain that they can just choose to pop and they will die if you try and torture them.
Yeah.
And I think it's hilarious that this is Temerian Secret Service that's doing this, because you can just imagine when the stories go, I need you to find this bloody Witcher, Foltest banging his table in the council chamber. And saying, yep, get your best men on it, tie him down, burn his feet, do whatever you want. We need to find Cirilla. And I can just imagine that there's a certain chestnut-haired sorceress who sits at the council table with Foltest who would have said, oh, from my medical side of things, I think you should know. Witches have this thing in their brain that could pop at any time.
Yeah.
So you can't torture a witcher, because we know that our friend with the chestnut hair has a thing about witches, and anything she can do to keep them safe out on the roads, I'm sure she'll do.
Yeah. Otherwise, who's going to look out for her when she's got
just
diarrhea in the woods?
Where else could that story come from? It didn't come from Codringer. So who else is putting this misinformation about? It's such a fascinating one that I'm absolutely sure that it's Tris Merigold.
Oh, that's a really nice thought to bring to that as well, because it is such a funny, silly line. And then I think it's again is the idea of a cyanide pill something that Sapkowski is pulling from our history of war. That's a nice little thought that it could just be Tris Merigold sowing small havoc among the Temerian Secret Service on Geralt's behalf. What we do for a friend. I mean, when we look at everything else that's happening on the continent, we're just getting pieces on the board, but we get markers on Geralt, Yen, Ciri, in the conversation with Codringer, who rinses, what he's up to, and then the continual note on how the northern kingdoms are strategically trying to mobilize against Nilfgaard in a careful kind of way where they're trying not to provoke, but they have the false flag prepared and they have the boats prepared. And what a fascinating insight into, again, the machine.
Yeah. And the fact that Dykstra certainly knows that they're being suckered here, that's his message that's come through. It's just
oh, God.
guys, don't do it.
Yeah.
This is a trap. They've actually got an army in Dol Angra. This is the last
Yeah.
thing you want to do is cross that river. Imagine if the troops go across the river in the boats and there they are on the opposite
Yeah.
shore. It's fine if they're not
Ah,
expecting you and stuff. But at this point, how do you get back if you get attacked? And that's exactly what's going to happen. So,
yeah, and like we're with Aplegatt as Dijkstra's putting the pieces together out loud that the Witcher's out
oh
there
yeah.
slaughtering people, but the lion cub is dead? Huh.
Why is he doing that?
And that means nothing to Aplegatt, but we're sitting there as
Yeah.
readers being like, oh shit, Dijkstra knows.
Yeah.
And oh goodness. Again, little snippets, but like so good. Maybe by the time we finish this discussion, like finish all these episodes of Time of Contempt, maybe I'll grow to love the book. I still don't know if it'll compare to the end of the series for me, but maybe I'll
No.
like this book a little more. As we kind of like wrap up the end of our discussion, any last minute thoughts on Time of Contempt Chapter 1?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the dream sharing with Ciri and but featuring Kahira and Geralt,
Yes.
so the three are tied together in dreams. But it's also the first time, I think it's the first serious time it happens where Ciri's vision, she's riding along a lane lined with willow trees, and that's important. Willow trees traditionally are seen as a sign of rebirth and also of women's power.
Okay.
And willow-lined tracks and waterways are a big thing for Ciri throughout the saga. It just comes up again and again. When Ciri's trying to get somewhere, when the willow tree's there, it's a moment of change for her. It's right there. I mean, there is a body of water in the Lady of the Lake, which has willows around it, for instance, which is important. The very end of the Season of Storms, Nimue sets off following the willows down the track, and who's she being drawn after? Which is the character she will have this? It's amazing. It all ties together, and so again, I don't think it's accidental.
I'm getting chills, like talking about it.
And straight up foreshadowing, obviously, for the very next chapter. So it's all there. It's remarkable. I've never known someone be quite so good because it's not just foreshadowing. It's the way he just. It gets the reader ready for things to happen. It's not so. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose that is foreshadowing, really, isn't it? So, he just he tied things together in such a clever way that nothing's a shock. There's never a jarring moment in which you're like, where did that come from? Except when it's meant to. Horrible old men in the woods and things like that. That's meant to be jarring, and it is. But there's no foreshadowing for him other than everything anyone ever does to Ciri. Never nice.
Oh goodness, yeah. Well, I think like as you said, as we close down this chapter, what a stunning opening to Time of Contempt. Again, like it's a huge shift in pace and in tone from where we've been in the short stories and in Blood of Elves. Time of Contempt is the turning point and is the inciting event for the rest of the series. I think we are introduced to this book at like absolutely breakneck speed. Sapkowski just like chucks us in the water. This is a sort of baptism of fire.
Yeah.
As we are, just dropped in and learning about political happenings on the continent that are going to profoundly impact our main characters and the rest of history. Aplegatt's death, specifically, is an inciting event on the continent, which is, I think, again, why I love the character so much. It's such a strong introduction to the war, to everything that happens on the continent, to our characters, and reminds us why we love this world in the first place. It's so big and it's so immersive that this perspective, and even all the reminders about like how we've come to be here from Codringer too, are they are picturesque and they're vivid, and they remind us really why we're here, and it's just snaps the reader back into place. And then as we continue to dive back into the world with Geralt and Yen and Ciri in future chapters. But goodness, such a strong start to the book because of its prose and of its illustrations in this kind of calm before the storm. so invigorating and so fun. And like R.I.P. Aplegatt, we loved you for the entire chapter. But yeah, I have a feeling I will have a healthy relationship with Time of Contempt after this, 7-part therapy session. That is it for our show today. Softie, thanks for joining me for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. So where can people find you? And is there anything that our community can help you with, or anything that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, as usual, I'm really only on the Discord. So.
But active, very active.
Far too active. I am probably the thread killer on there. There's far too many of these little rooms that I'm the last message in, and I think, oops, I'm definitely saying too much here. People are literally leaving the room rather than talk to me. So I need to cut it down a bit.
No,
but,
so enjoyable.
I've received a late birthday present. I put in a big order for 6mm tabletop miniature figures to recreate the Battle of Brenna. And so I've got Sapkowski does love to jump around in his time period. So I've got to have, medieval and Renaissance all mixed in together, but no firearms, that's not allowed. So all of these things. So it's quite fun. So I've got, Landsknechten and various, French gendarmes, all of these different groups there ready to put on the table. So
amazing.
I could quite do with a little bit of help from smarter people with color schemes and stuff, because I've never got my head around, quite how to do this. So trying to do massive amounts of Nilfgaardian cavalry, they can't just all be in black, it would be as dull as anything. So I'm looking at having different spiraling ribbons running up the lances and stuff for the different colors for the different units and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just how I bring this off, how I do the black armor. Do I do like a little, do I have it largely black with like a little faint highlight along the edges of metallic, or how do I do it? There's lots of ways of approaching it, and it's I could really do with some advice of it.
So. Maybe draft some stuff up in Hero Forge, and then you can kind of like see them all side by side before you start painting them.
Why not? Good idea. Thank you.
Hero Forge, come and sponsor the podcast. Ooh. Listen, I wouldn't turn down a Hero Forge sponsorship.
But normally you're sitting there playing around with the color wheels, which are contrasting colors that then look great together. And it's like, well, yeah, but you can't do that when you've been told it's all black.
Yeah,
and,
do it in Hero Forge.
the issue here with 6mm, I mean, they are so tiny.
Small,
little weenie epic figures. They look great.
Dachshunds across the board.
Most people are playing with sort of 28mm for this sort of stuff.
Sure.
What you get there is like a regiment of 16 figures, where I've got a regiment of like 48 little tiny guys. And I think it looks nicer. These massed ranks and stuff. If you're going to do a battle, you don't want half a dozen people standing about looking embarrassed. It's like no.
Just big a little coat of spray paint.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm so excited to hear and like follow along with whatever saga, the Softie saga of all your little figurines and how that goes. We still got to paint all of our Witcher Old World figurines.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I still haven't unboxed my shipping box yet.
No.
I got to do that.
There's some great stuff in there. There really is.
I know. I'm so excited. It's one of those things that I'm like, should I make content about this? Do I have to record a video unboxing this? And it's like, probably. But I'll get around to it soon, I'm sure.
You do have to. I mean, mine's just up there behind me.
Yeah, mine's in the room.
But you do have to factor in, of course, how much it costs, how impossible it is to replace one bit of it. So when you've got a small puppy and I've got kittens, wow, they do not mix well with very hard to get small board game components. So.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, you don't want to be sitting there watching them having a crack to see if you can get that Zoigle back. It's like, no thanks. It's gone now.
I didn't know you could stuff an entire Eridan on horseback. You're only a 6-pound puppy. Goodness. Yeah, I think my quiet days of like painting acrylic in the corner might be over for a bit. Before they've started, regrettably, but I'll have to circle back around to that soon. But goodness, yeah, thanks again, Softie. It's always such a pleasure getting to chat with you, and I guess I'm gonna have you on for Brenna.
Well,
and maybe before.
Who knows?
Hopefully
it's been
soon.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And next episode, guys, join us as we continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt with Chapter 2. Oh, that was fun.
It's okay, wasn't it?
I had a good time. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the tidings from Toussaint, music by Alyssa Mitraflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Katie, the redhead of Toussaint, Jacob Beebe, Haven at the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Beggarburg Glamorai, the original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill, Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softie. Special thanks to Softie for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support.